This is the third part of the video on how the 10 tribes got to the Americas. So we understand that with the Israelites coming to our Sarah/America and going into the four corners of the world, that there was other counterparts at hand. There was other people that played a big part in the scattering of Israel. And so we're going to go into that. We're going to find key players that contributed to these stories. 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 10. And this is very critical to understanding where the 10 tribes went and who these sorcerers were who spoke on the Israelites regarding at the end of times that they would gain all the riches of the earth. This is very key to this video. So we're going to go again, 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 9. And they shall answer, because they forsook the Most High their power, who brought forth their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other gods, and have worshipped them and served them. Therefore hath the Most High brought upon them all this evil. And it came to pass at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the two houses, which was the house of the Most High and the house of Solomon. Now Hiram, the king of Tyre, had furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees, and with gold according to all his desire. That then Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. So this man brought all these riches to King Solomon, was from a nation. And that nation, as we read, it says, Hiram, the king of Tyre. Tyre is also known as Carthage. Carthage is also known as Phoenicia, where the Phoenicians dwelt. These are all surnames of Phoenicia: Tyre, Carthage, Libya. Verse 12. And Hiram came out from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they pleased him not. Hiram was a Hamite. You got Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Hiram came from the nation of Ham. Verse 13. And he said, What cities are these which thou hast given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul unto this day. And Hiram sent to the king 60 talents of gold. So Hiram is getting this gold. Where is he getting this gold? We have to understand this gold that he's getting is from a place that we now know as Africa. It was one of the only gold producing countries in the world at that time that was known. The other was our Sarah, but the first was Africa, which you have the Gold Coast on the west side of Africa. So Hiram was traveling to the west side of Africa, and as I said, Hiram was a friend of King David, and he's also a friend of King Solomon. Let's read verse 24. But Pharaoh's daughter came up out of the city of David unto her house which Solomon had built for her. Then did he build Millo. And 3 times in a year Solomon offered burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he built unto the Most High, and he burnt incense upon the altar that was before the Most High. So he finished the house. Let's drop down to verse 27. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon. The servants of Solomon were the Israelites. Remember the prophecy that was spoken to Samuel, given to the Israelites, that the sons and daughters of Israel were going to serve the king of Israel. So yet Israelites serving under the banner of King Hiram that was sent from King Solomon. Verse 28. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold 420 talents. and brought it to King Solomon. The 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 21. 1 Kings chapter 10 and verse 21. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. There was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish, which is Phoenicia, with the navy of Ephraim. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes, and peacocks. What is another word known for apes? Gorillas. Some of the so-called white men, when he first saw these apes, he thought that they were people. He thought they were wild and crazy. But no, they were apes. They were gorillas. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. This should tell you that in the kingdom of Israel knew that there was lands far away other than Africa, Asia, and Europe. They knew that there was islands further than what the Greeks had known. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which the Most High had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, and garments and armor, spices, horses, and mules, a rate year by year. So this is important to know that you had Ham dwelling in the midst of Shem. You had Israelites who were dealing with the nation of Ham, sending servants to learn a trade that Ham had specialized in. This is very critical and very important to the story of the 10 tribes. This is a book called Revelation, the movement of the Acon people from Canaan to Ghana by Akanba. This book was first published by Author House January 6, 2010. There's an ISBN number. And this is page 65. As we all know, that Hannibal was an Israelite who was from that land of the Ephraim. Could have possibly been one of those servants' children who worked under Solomon, from the tribe of Asher. See that? Hanel originated from the tribe of Asher. He was a family leader and one of the 3 sons of Awula, the biblical Ula. There's the verse. Now let's jump down here. Tarshish. Isaac M. Wise wrote in his History of the Israelitish Nation, only the first volume of which was ever published. The connection of the Israelites, Phoenicians, Egyptians, and especially Tyrians improved the industry of the nation. Notice, we always worked around him. Solomon favored this state of things by entering into a closer connection with the maritime enterprise of Ephraim. The Israelites were unacquainted with ship construction and navigation, wherefore a commercial fleet was constructed, most likely at Joppa, which manned by Tyrians, and Israelites went to Tarshish, which was probably the name for all the known coast of Africa, because ships sailed for Tarshish from Joppa and Egon Geber. This much is sure, that the Israelites took an active part in the Mediterranean trade. We hear about the tribe of Dan, they were one of them, and Asher, which poured additional wealth into the coffers of the king, but also into the nation. All right. The Chaldea paraphrase of the scripture, supposed to have been written about the time of our Savior, renders the word Tarshay by Africa. This view is supported by the Jewish Encyclopedia, where we read, modern scholars are inclined to identify the biblical Tarshay with Carthage, since it is thus translated in the Septuagint, the Targum, and the Vulgate, different Bibles. Professor Rawlinson, subscribing to the view of Dean Stanley and the Reverend J. Hammond, insist on a clear distinction between the way of Tarshish and the one which brought gold from Ophir. Consequently, he maintains, it was the ambition of Solomon to make the Israelites a nautical people, so they knew the way of the ships. This is why it's in the book of Esdras. That's why he mentioned the Septuagint and the Vulgate. It's in there. 2nd Esdras, chapter 13. It was the ambition of Solomon to make the Israelites a nautical people and to participate in the advantage which he had perceived to have accrued to Phoenicia from a commercial enterprise. Besides sharing with the Phoenicians in the trade of the Mediterranean, he constructed with her help a fleet of Agon Geber upon the Red Sea, and the two allies conjointly made voyages to the region or country called Ophir. So this tells you that the Israelites knew about the nautical history of building ships and selling ships. Let's go down to Gold Coast of Tarshay for all you brothers who think that our seraph was in Africa. Let's just go ahead and talk about that gold that Solomon got, and it came from the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast can be seen by some as included in the Tarshay of King Solomon's fleet for the king's navy once in 3 years. This is what we read in the book of 1 Kings. For the king's navy once in 3 years went with the navy of Hiram by sea to Tarshay, and brought from thence gold and silver and elephants' teeth and apes and peacocks. It gives you the scripture there. Nowhere else do we find so conveniently the combination of gold, ivory, and apes. In regards the present absence of peacocks from the coast, the difficulty is met by a record of the 17th century. The presence of Ethiopians might further strengthen the claims of the Gold Coast to be included in Tarshay of Solomon. And the words of Josephus, they finished the voyage, going and coming in 3 years, may classify the meaning of the scriptural once in 3 years of the English text. The Simopertres Annos Abbat of the Latin version, as well as the Septuagint Greek, might even seem to favor the rendition of Josephus that it took 3 years for the voyage. However, here again, while all is conjecture, it does not seem at all likely that Hebrews could have been in sufficient numbers to have left a lasting impression on language and customs. They weren't in charge, but everyone spoke the same language. Okay, a lot of people think that Arabic was here before Hebrew. No, Arabic is Hebrew. It's the Aramaic Hebrew. No one was speaking Arabic in the olden days. Arabic is new. Let's jump over to page 67. Let's drop down here to Tripoli in the middle of the page. But now leaving Carta for some time, let us turn our eyes to the east. A.H. Keene, speaking of Tripoli, states, some of the Jews appear to be direct descendants, not, as has been said, of the lost tribes, but at all events of immigrants settled in the country since the Ptolemaic dynasty. Very, very important. If the Ptolemaic dynasty was in Carthage, if they were in all these lands, then Carthage was not Carthage. Carthage was Greek. Same thing with Egypt. If the Greeks were in Egypt, Egypt became Greek. Although the people may be black or dark complexion, the ruling powers were the Greeks at that time. Anytime you see that Ptolemaic dynasty. So the orders that came from the Ptolemaic leaders were given to the dark tribes or the dark people to carry out missions. I just want to reiterate that so you understand when we get to the point. All right, it reads here, and Lieutenant Colonel Casserly asserts thousands of Jews expelled from Israel in the 4th century BC. This is before Christ. And others driven in the 2nd century AD from Cyrene, which is in Africa, where they had sought refuge after the fall of Jerusalem, had swelled the numbers of the comparatively few descendants of those Israelites who had come to Africa as the Phoenician commercial agents. Who were these Jews? Phoenician commercial agents. They had uniforms on, and they weren't who they wanted to be. They were following orders. These were the sorcerers that we read about in Lost Tribes and Promised Land. We had Israelites who still kept their customs, but were Phoenician by title. Let's read this. Early Hebrews, Nahum Sloss, is more explicit in the chapter on the cave dwellers, Beni Abs. I'll talk about the dispersion in North Africa. Referring to the beginning of his investigation in North Africa, he tells us, my knowledge of the interior of Libya, which is in Africa, was confined to the information brought back by writers of antiquity and to the allusions occurring in Jewish literature. Tripoli is in Libya. I knew that at one time there was a people dwelling in these, page 68, caves, as the Greek authors tell us that in the days of Flavius Josephus, this people claimed descended from Ephraim, son of Abraham. That elsewhere several groups of cave dwellers or mountain Jews lost sight, still maintain their existence. Just like the book I brought out some time ago where they found 400 Jews dwelling in Calabar. The Argonaut Press, the itinerary of Ludovico de Varthema of Bologna. So we're going to turn to page 14. I'm going to drop down to the bottom to the last paragraph. And we're going to read here where it says at. I'll try to zoom out so you can see it better. This is at the end of 8 days we found a mountain, Calabar, which appeared to be 10 or 12 miles in circumference, in which mountain there dwell 4,000 or 5,000 Jews who go naked and are in height 5 or 6 spans. Well, these were 6 feet tall Jews, and have a feminine voice and are more black than any other color. They live entirely upon the flesh of sheep and eat nothing else. So they were living kosher. They are circumcised and confess that they are Jews. And if they can get a Moor into their hands, they skin them alive. So they're not Moors, they're not Arabs, they're Jews, and they are black. Just so y'all know that the Jews were black. And this is on page 33 of the discourse. We're going to drop down. I want to show you something here, showing you the year that they found these people. It says down here where it says they are first heard of in AD 568. So this is before that whole Jewish movement from Europe. They are first heard of in AD 568 and are mentioned by Abu Ja'far Ali in his Agani, or songs, in the 10th century. So this is 4th century notes recorded and reproduced in the 10th century. They were reduced to great poverty by Muhammad in 628 and driven out by the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, but they were back again by 1173. So they came back, these black Jews, when Benjamin of Tudela found a colony of them. All right, so they were not Arabs, because it tells you in this whole lineup that they weren't Arabs, but they were Jews. See that? Jewish inhabitants, noted by Fatima, were probably originally refugees from north in sequence of the many persecutions that they met with, all at the hands of the enemies of all kinds. This is how you know. Jump up. I don't want to read too much. May be presumed they found a mountain which appeared to be 10 or 12 miles in circumference, in which mountain there dwell 4 or 5,000 Jews, who were clad and colored like Bedouins. They were black. They looked like Bedouin Arabs. Bedouin Arabs are black Arabs, Badawi, and are described as being possessed of a fanatical hatred of all Arabs. And they had a reason. Their habitation was the Calabar Oasis to the north of Medina, funky cold Medina, and its name is said to be taken from a Hebrew word, kabar, a castle. So, I mean, I ain't making this stuff up. I'm telling you, they were dwelling in a desert of Arabia, and these were black Jews, and this is in the 4th century, before all the lies start coming out saying that the Jews were another people. The remnants of a once numerous people leading here a most primitive life, but still clinging to the ancient traditions. It is interesting then to find the same author, after 10 years of research and personal investigation, positively asserting there have been Jews in the town of Tripoli from the earliest times, perhaps from the period of Phoenician colonization. So the Phoenicians, again, were under the Greeks of the Ptolemaic Empire, but prior to that, they were under the power of the Persian Empire. Prior to that, they were under the thumb of the Babylonian Empire. Prior to that, they were under the commands of the Assyrian Empire. The Phoenicians never had a strong enough military to fight against the powers that be. So they always became others. They always became other titles. The only time the Phoenicians had a working relationship with someone who wasn't dominant over them was during the time of the Egyptians. They worked hand in hand together. Also during the time of Jerusalem, when King David and Solomon were the king, that's when it was a time of peace. And then lastly, when Hannibal was one of the leading generals in that land, that's another time of peace until they went to war with Rome. But after that, the Greeks conquered, and the Greeks possessed all of Phoenicia, all the ports of Phoenicia was controlled by the Greeks, mainly by Ptolemy. He had possession of all of that. Now, we have to understand, why did the Greeks want that possession of those places, especially Jerusalem and its villages? So one of the main reasons why they wanted the ports and those villages, first and foremost, it was for trade. Remember Jerusalem, remember why the Israelites went into Israel? They saw giants carrying grapes, huge grape clusters. So that land of Israel had the best fruit, best vegetable, all the goodly things that came from the earth produced very well there. So they wanted that land. They wanted the port to control traffic, trade, and commerce, to control all the lands and all the ports. Because we know that the heads of the Greeks were Edomites. So if we know that, when we look at the scriptures, let's go to First Esdras in the 1611 King James Bible Apocrypha. So let's look at verse 41, and it says, this is after Darius gave Zerubbabel power to go back to Jerusalem by the use of politics and money. Verse 41. This is First Esdras chapter 4, verse 41. And with that he had held his peace, and all the people then shouted and said, great is the truth, and mighty above all things. Then said the king unto him, ask what thou wilt, more than is appointed in the writing, politics, and we will give it thee, because thou art found wisest, and thou shalt sit next to me, and shalt be called my cousin. Then said he unto the king, remember thy vow, which thou hast vowed to build Jerusalem in the day when thou camest to the kingdom, and to send away all the vessels that were taken away out of Jerusalem, which Cyrus set apart, when he vowed to destroy Babylon, and to send them again thither. Verse 45, check this out. Thou also hast vowed to build up the temple, which the Edomites burned when Judea was made desolate by the Chaldees. So Edom had a hand in this. They personally burned down the temple. Verse 46, and now, O Lord the king, this is that which I require and which I desire of thee, and this is the princely liberty proceeding from thyself. I desire therefore that thou make good the vow, the performance whereof with thine own mouth thou hast vowed to the King of heaven. Then Darius the king stood up and kissed him, and wrote letters for him unto all the treasurers and lieutenants. He wrote policies, and captains and governors, that they should safely convey on their way both him and all those that go up with him to build Jerusalem. He wrote letters also unto the lieutenants that were in Syria and Phoenix, which is Phoenicia. So we possess Phoenicia. He had to write letters to the areas of the ships. Then let us go back to our nautical jobs. And it says, and unto them in Libanus, that they should bring cedar wood from Lebanon unto Jerusalem, and that they should build the city with him. Moreover, he wrote for all the Jews that went out of his realm up unto Juri, concerning their freedom, that no officer, no ruler, no lieutenant, nor treasurer should forcibly enter into their doors, and that all the country which they hold, who held it, we're about to read about it, should be free without tribute, and that the Edomites should give over the villages of the Jews, which then they held. So who had our villages? Why couldn't we go back home? The Edomites possessed all our houses. They possessed our temple area. They possessed everything we have, even up until the coast. So we were granted permission to go back home, to go back to work on the ports. So we knew the nautical ways. This goes into the scripture, 2 Esdras chapter 13, when the 10 tribes left. Just keep that in mind when we're talking about the Phoenicians, because he addressed the Phoenicians in this policy. want to talk about the Phoenician explorers. This is critical. Before closing this chapter, we must touch briefly on the possible influence that may have reached the coast of West Africa through the seafaring exploits of our Carthage foreparents or of their parent state. W. Walton Claridge, speaking of the voyage of the Phoenicians around Africa, at the behest of King Necho, 609 to 594 BC, 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 29, verse 33 through 35, 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verse 20 through 22, chapter 36, verse 3 through 4, Jeremiah chapter 46, verse 2. This brother is given all types of scriptures to back his point. Chapter 47, verse 1 of Egypt suggests if they did in fact visit the Gold Coast, it is possible that it was then that they discovered the gold was obtainable there and found that more or less regular trade, which there is reason to suppose at one time or another existed. For the Gold Coast may have been visited by others of the Phoenician explorers. Who's the others? The Hebrews, who sailed along the West African coast, but of whose exploits no record has been preserved. These Phoenicians, these sailors, did not talk about their travels. If they did, only the king knew about it. These seafaring men went further than just Africa. These Phoenicians. Professor Bresta states in the far west, as early as 500 BC, Phoenician navigators had passed Gibraltar. That's in the Mediterranean Sea, leaving Spain and Portugal and parts of North Africa, going out towards the Atlantic Ocean. And turning southward, had probably reached the coast of Guinea, whence they brought back marvelous stories of the hairy men, whom the interpreters call gorillas. And again, he is of the opinion that the Carthaginian settlement extended southward along the Atlantic coast of Africa to the edge of the Sahara. In this direction, Hanno, one of the famous captains, explored the coast of Africa as far as Guinea. Let's go over here to colonies. Colonies. It reads, as a matter of fact, Stephen Giselle now considers it as proven that Hanno and his Carthaginians expedition along with the west coast of Africa actually passed the coast of Guinea. He also regards it as plausible that Hanno extended his exploration almost as far as the equator. In this case, there may well have been Carthage colonies established along the Guinea coast, and possibly not a few Hebrews may have joined in these enterprises. They were seafaring men, and they saw a lot. Africa wasn't just the only place. They made their way into the Americas. This book is called The Cultural Library with an Encyclopedia Index. Copyright Parents Magazine Enterprise, 1959 to 1966. So it's been out for a while. Let's go to page 37. And let's read about Carthage. What we're doing is making a foundation. We're going to go here at the bottom of page 37. Scipio ad Zama. The Roman Republic starts on the path to the empire. But this is before the Romans, this paragraph right here. This is during the Greeks. By 265 BC, Rome controlled all Italy. It now became a rival of Carthage, the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. Carthage had been established as a colony of the Phoenicians in the 9th century BC. In the 6th century BC, however, the Babylonians and Persians conquered Phoenicia, and Carthage became an independent city. All this is in the same area. It had a splendid harbor near the site of modern Tunis. All these cities all together. Page 38. And this commanding geographical location enabled Carthage to build an empire that ruled the western Mediterranean for 3 centuries. Carthage was a nation of merchants and seamen. Its empire extended along the North African coast from Libya to Gibraltar and included all the islands of western Mediterranean except for about half of the island of Sicily. The Carthaginians traded widely with other parts of the world and were among the first to sail the Atlantic to trade with the island of Britain. You ever heard of Sicilians, black Sicilians? Where this is where they come from. They come from the Carthaginians, or even Hebrews. They got tin from Britain, gold, ivory, and precious stones from the interior of Africa, wheat from the rich plains of North Africa, and wealth from trade, custom duties, and tribute. In 265 BC, Carthage was one of the wealthiest cities in the world. So what makes you think that they wouldn't be able to sell to the Americas? Who sailed along the West African coast, but of whose exploits no record has been preserved. Now why? They had the mobility. They had the equipment. They had the manpower. A lot of these brothers that you see here knew of the Olmecs. Rome and Carthage came to blows over the island of Sicily. See that? This is how you know that the black Sicilians were from Africa. They were Carthaginians, or even Hebrews. Let's go to page 31 and let's find out what Alexander the Greek did. Although he didn't conquer Carthage, his right-hand man did, Ptolemy. And as we read this, we're going to go to page 31, the topic, Cincinnatus goes home. We're going to start at Alexander. It says, economically, Alexander's conquests brought together the separate economic areas of Greece and the Orient. Most people don't think that the Greeks went any further than Carthage. As we read, we're going to show you. Within a century, there developed a new world economy, extending eastward to China and westward to Britain. So they went through the Gibraltar, and including the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe within the trading area. Now this is North Africa and East Africa, but they also made their way into some parts of West Africa. Perhaps the greatest influence of Alexander's conquests were cultural. Alexander's ideal of world state free from racial or other distinctions helped inspire the same ideal as part of Christianity. Now you know why the Christians came over to the Americas. So we have to understand the foundation of the original Christianity, because today's Christianity is not the original Christian-like behaviors, which was written of in Acts. Today's Christianity is now a Roman Christianity, which has nothing to do with what the Bible states. It says, without Alexander, Greek culture probably would have died. Instead, largely because of him, Greek culture expanded its influence throughout the ancient Near East and the Roman West. So the Roman West extended all the way over to the Americas. And it remains a vital element in modern civilization. This is a book called America Being an Accurate Description of the New World. And this is by John Ogilvy Onaldos Montanus. This book was first published in 1670. Again, it was first published in 1670. So we're going to go to page 18. This book has a lot of goodies in it too. And we're going to read here to get an idea. We're going to find clues. It says, Herodias' faith thus of the Phoenicians. They lived formerly according to their own relations along the shore of the Red Sea, from whence removing they planted the seacoasts of the Syrians. Who are we talking about? The Phoenicians. These aren't the Phoenicians that we are familiar with from the time of the early days of Genesis with the Canaanites. These are new Phoenicians, just like these are new Syrians. Festus Avenus, the Latin poet, agrees with this opinion, where he saith, on the Phoenicians' coast the ocean beats, who through the Red Sea sailing change their seats, change their houses, change their look to become a different look. It's kind of like what they call today in black neighborhoods, they call it gentrification. This is the same thing with saying change their seats. They were the first that ventured through the seas and frightened ships, merchandise, fair or foul weather. They without control sought foreign trade directed by the pole. Aristotle, from a Greek word, calls them Phoenicians. It's the same as Phoenicians. From their being red or bloody with the slaughter of all strangers that landed on their coasts. But rather, or so indeed, they are called Phoenicians or Erythrians, because even the Erythrians today, people say that the Italians conquered them, but you go to Erythria and there's still so-called black people there, but they call it an Italian nation. From, who's that? Esau. From Esau, or Edom, from whom they are derived. For these two words, or denominations, these two words, Esau, Edom, Sodom also a denomination, you see that? Called Edom a denomination, signify in Greek red. So now you know that Esau is a denomination. What denomination are you from? You Baptist? Pentecostal? Roman Catholic? What denomination are you from? You see, denominations have nothing to do with religions. Denominations have everything to do with nations. What nation are you from? Are you a denomination of Jacob? Are you a denomination of Japheth? Are you a denomination of Ham? Or are you a denomination of Esau? Meaning, that is your belief and your customs. But when you talk about these religions being of a denomination, it's like conjuring up air. It means nothing. The two last, the like in Hebrew, Phoenix himself first planted all the country lying between the river Eleutheris and the Egyptian city Pelusium, and afterwards Dalmatia, washed by the Mediterranean. But since these boundaries are altered on the north by Judea, westward by the Mediterranean, southerly by Egypt, and towards the east by the desert Arabia. So he's giving you an idea of who Esau controlled. He controlled all these nations, and they became Esau's land. The chiefest cities are Ptolemy, otherwise called Acon. So Acon, which is in Carthage, Ptolemy ran. There were people of color that were there, but Ptolemy ran that place. Sidon, that's also another place of color. Arad is another place of color. Great Cana, Sarepta, Byblis, Bothras, Berythus, and their princess Tyre, formerly situate in an island, but since joined to the mainland by Alexandria the Great. So all these places became Edomized. None can disown but that the Phoenicians have everywhere been admirals at sea, of the sea, so that they were formidable to the greatest princes. When the Persian king Cambyses came with a vast army against the Carthaginians, he was forced to give over his design because the Phoenicians refused to help him with their fleet, being allied to and the city founded by them. So who did the Persians fight against? They fought against the Greeks. So this is really close-knit. We can see how Esau with the Greeks took over everything, which strove with Rome to the empress of the world, but also the famous city Leptis, Utica, Hippo, and Adramyttium in Africa, which Cadiz and Tartium in Spain. Nay, they sent plantations of people into the heart of Iberia and Libya. It will not be amiss to add Curtis, his relation, who tells us wherever the Phoenicians came with their fleets, landing their men, they subdued whole countries. See that? Now put two and two. Who came over to the Americas? It was Esau, using the face of the Phoenicians. And by that means spread their colonies all over the known world. Carthage in Africa, Thebes in Boeotia, and Cadiz near the western ocean. Aristotle relates that they made such rich returns of their merchandise, and chiefly of their oil in Spain, that their anchors, pins, and all iron materials belonging to a ship instead of that metal were silver. But to return to our discourse and disprove the former testimony that the Phoenicians found America. See that? So where did these Phoenicians, where did Esau go? Where did the Greeks go? To America. Why did they go there? Because they knew the 10 tribes went there. What happened? A great war happened. And who won? Well, we'll save that for last. That'll be on the next video. So stay tuned to the next video. This is the same book. This is page 21. It reads, "This large relation serves for nothing else but to show that they seek in vain herein to give the honor of the discovery of America to the ancients. And as little do those testimonies signify that are taken out of Diodotus, Siculus, Pliny, Pomponius, Mela, and Aelian. It would be worth our time to hear every one of them particularly. First, Diodorus saith, beyond Libya in the ocean lies a very great island, several days sailing in circumference, having a very fruitful soil and pleasant meadows, distinguished by hills and moistened by navigationable rivers, unknown in ancient times, because it seems to be separated from the other world, and was thus found the Phoenicians sailing along the Libyan coast. were several days and nights tossed with perpetual tempests, and at last driven to the Formentation Island, where anchoring and observing the pleasant situation thereof made it known to their magistrates. But how comes this nameless island to be America? What man would take that for an island, which far exceeds the main continent of Asia, and have the Phoenicians ascribed the finding of this new world to any? Whence then proceeds such great silence amongst all the ancient writers of the whole world, who otherwise used to give denominations to the least remote village or mountain or river. So now we have some understanding what happened. These Phoenicians that we thought were friendly Phoenicians that came to America weren't friendly Phoenicians at all. These were Phoenicians that were under the banner of Esau, and they came over here to conquer the 10 tribes of Israel and whoever else was with them. I want to go into another book. This book is called The Harvest of Hellenism, A History of the Near East, from Alexandria, or Alexander the Great, to the Triumph of Christianity. I'm going to go to page 40. I just want to bring this out. Page 40. And it says, Darius, this is in the Persian Empire, went to the Greek. Darius had veered off to the east toward the safer precincts of Mesopotamia and Iran, but Alexander pushed on to the south through the Phoenician coastal cities of Byblos and Zidon, which yielded without a struggle. So who controlled Phoenician coastal cities? Alexander the Great, which is a denomination of Esau or Edom. It says, here in the shipyards and sailors of Phoenicia was the source of Persian naval strength, because the Persians owned it first. But when the Macedonians conquered the Persians, it made things a lot easier for Alexander the Great. Alexander argued, not very convincingly, that it would be dangerous to leave either Phoenicia or Egypt untaken at his rear. He may have been tempted by the promised ease of the assault, but if so, he was truly disappointed at Tyre, whose island garrison resisted his siege for 7 months in the summer of BC 332. So Alexander the Great conquered Phoenicia and Egypt. You can also look it up in a dictionary. You can look it up in this book here, Dr. William Smith Dictionary of the Bible, Volume 3. He talks about how Phoenicia was renamed by Alexander, by the Greeks. Right? You go under Phoebe, you go to Phoenix, right? And you just go through here and you find out the place. It says here, it's very small writing. The place under our present consideration was a town and harbor on the south coast of Crete, and the name was doubtless derived from the Greek word for the palm tree, which Theophrastus says was indigenous in the island. Palm tree. The ancient notices of Phoenix converge remarkably to establish its identity with the modern Luthro. Look at this one. Moreover, we find applied to this locality by the modern Greeks, not only in the word Phoenix or Phoenicia, which is clearly Phoenix but also the word Annapolis or Annapolis and Aradina. But you could read through this and you'll find out that the Greeks eventually end up controlling the Phoenician. And then when the Greeks fell, the Phoenicians became Carthage. They became a free country, and this is when Hannibal fought against Rome. And even when he conquered Rome, the Romans never let up. They still chased after the 10 tribes that were in the Americas. So this has been an ongoing thing for them to chase after the 10 tribes in America and to what? Kill, steal, and destroy. And they succeeded with the hands of the Spaniards and the French and the Portuguese during the time of the Inquisition in 1492. Again, this book here's another book called Feast and Wisdom of the Ancients. I just want to read this one paragraph, letting you know that the Romans also tried, but for some reason they stopped chasing after a while. The ancient Hebrews of Tennessee. Throughout the river valleys of the southeastern United States lie hundreds of man-made earthen mounds in which American Indians laid their dead to rest. But in one such mound, according to some researchers, there are non-Indian remains as well. The bones of, I'll say, Israelite refugees who may have fled the brutal Roman occupation of Palestine in the 1st century AD. There was also a lot of Israelites who fled by ship into the Americas during the 1st century as well. A lot of brothers and sisters don't know that. They fled to where their brothers were here in the Americas. So there's Israelites all in America of the 12 tribes of Israel. The only difference between the 10 tribes and the southern kingdom is we denied Yahawashi. They never got a chance to deny, even though there was some living with us in Israel. But those who were scattered already didn't deny Yahawashi. This is why they have the opportunity to hear about the Messiah now and to repent. This is why the curses are much worse on the southern tribes versus those of the northern tribes, because they never denied Yahawashi. These days are the days of their denial. 90% of the people were killed in the Americas by diseases. These are the days. These are the days. These are called the last days that we're living in. Either you accept Christ or you die. Either you repent and keep his commandments or you die and perish. We all are seeking resurrection, but these are the mysteries that I've been going over that the Bible speaks of, that we need be know of, that we needs be know of. I know it's poor English, but I'm using it so you can understand it. That needs be know of this history. We need to know this truth. Okay? So we have done a lot of things in this world, and here's the proof. All right? So yes, we came over to the Americas.